I was a few minutes late to my own company's anniversary party. I was walking down the hallway toward the banquet room when I heard my son's voice through the door, loud and happy, telling everyone I'd retired and handed the whole company over to him. I never said that. I never signed anything like that. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, long enough to hear the whole toast. My mom built this company from nothing, Kevin was saying, and I couldn't be prouder that she's finally letting me take it from here. Everyone clapped. I could hear it through the door. My name is Barbara Calder. I'm 66 years old. 41 years ago, I started a company called Calder Precision Tools outside Rockford, Illinois, in a rented space with 2 employees and a used lathe I bought with my own savings. Kevin is 37. He's worked there since his 20s, and for a long time I was genuinely proud of that. Some of me still is, even now, which is part of what makes this so hard to tell. I didn't walk in and ask what he meant. I turned around, walked back to my car, and sat there for a while, staring at the building I built. One toast could have just been Kevin getting ahead of himself, or it could have been something a lot bigger. I decided I needed to know which one it was before I said a single word to him, so I drove home instead. 2 days later, I ran into a longtime client of ours, a woman named Priscilla, at the grocery store. She hugged me and said, "Congratulations on finally slowing down. You've earned it." I smiled and thanked her. Then I asked, careful and easy, when she'd heard the news. "A few months ago," she said, "when Kevin and I worked out the new terms on our contract, he mentioned you were stepping back, so I've just been sending everything to him since then." She said it so naturally, like old information, like I was the last person on earth who hadn't gotten the memo about my own life. That conversation opened a door I couldn't close again. I started asking around after that, gently, not accusing anyone of anything, just trying to understand how far this had actually traveled. Our receptionist mentioned she'd updated the sign-in system with Kevin's name as president back in the spring. One of our suppliers told me, without a second thought, that he'd already redone his paperwork listing Kevin as the point of contact for everything going forward. It wasn't just talk anymore. People had already rearranged real parts of how they worked, based on something that had never actually happened. I wasn't chasing down a lie at that point. I was trying to figure out how many rooms it had already walked into before I ever heard it myself, and the answer, it turned out, went a lot closer to home than the office. The part that hurt worse than any of the business stuff came from my own sister, Susan. We talk every week, same time, same day, for years now. At our regular Sunday call, she mentioned, cheerful as anything, that she'd already told her whole book club I'd finally have time to travel with them next spring. "Since you're not tied down at the company anymore," she said. I asked her, as calm as I could manage, where she'd heard that. She said Kevin had told her at Easter, months before that toast, months before I'd heard a single word of any of this myself. My own sister had spent months quietly planning a future for me, telling other people about it, believing it completely, because my own son told her it was already decided. I sat with that phone call a long time after we hung up. It's one thing for a client or a supplier to hear something secondhand and take it at face value. It's another thing entirely to realize the people who know you best, who love you the most, had simply absorbed a story about your life without ever once checking with you directly. I still didn't understand how Kevin had made all of this sound so believable to so many people for so long. A few weeks into asking around, cleaning out an old filing cabinet in my office, I found the answer completely by accident. A spiral notebook I hadn't opened in years, full of loose notes I'd written for myself back when I turned 60, just me thinking out loud on paper about what might happen someday, far down the road when I finally did step back. I flipped through it and stopped cold. Some of my own exact phrases were sitting inside things Kevin had apparently been telling people for months. He hadn't invented a story out of nothing. He'd found my private, half-formed thoughts about my own future sitting in a drawer I'd forgotten about, and started handing them out to other people as settled fact. I remembered then that Kevin had helped me reorganize that same cabinet almost a year earlier. He must have found the notebook then, read through it, and simply decided to start living out loud what I'd only ever written down for myself, quietly, with no plan to act on any of it yet. For a stretch there, I couldn't believe Kevin had pulled all of this off completely on his own. He's never been the type to manage details like memos and paperwork. I started wondering about Foster, our operations manager, who'd worked beside me for almost 20 years and who I knew had access to plenty of company records. I confronted him about it, colder than I meant to. I asked him, flat out, how much he'd known. He looked genuinely stunned. He told me he'd heard the same things everyone else had, assumed they were true because so many people already believed them, and hadn't thought to question something that seemed like common knowledge by then. I didn't fully believe him at first. I kept my distance from him for a while after that, which I now know wasn't fair to him at all. It was the notebook, more than anything Foster said, that finally convinced me. Foster hadn't written those phrases, only Kevin had ever had access to that cabinet. Whatever had happened, my son had done this on his own, and every person who'd repeated it to someone else had simply been trusting him the way you trust family. By the time I finished asking around, quietly, over several weeks, I had a rough map of exactly how far this had spread. 3 major clients, most of our department heads, my own sister, and at least 2 old friends, our bank, where Kevin had listed himself as the primary contact for business matters, telling them he was handling the transition, an entire year-end planning meeting already being built around him as the one in charge going forward. None of these people were lying to me. That was the hardest part to sit with. Every single one of them was just quietly living inside a version of my future that had already been decided for me, without me, months before I ever heard a word of it myself. I could have walked into Kevin's office right then and asked him what he thought he was doing. Some nights I really wanted to, but I decided against it. I needed to understand the full size of this before I said one word to him, because a conversation where I only knew about the toast was never going to match a conversation where I understood exactly how many people's lives had already been quietly rearranged around a lie. So I let it keep going a little longer. I stepped back from a few day-to-day things on purpose, which only made it look, to everyone watching, like the story they'd already believed was finally coming true. I want to pause here for a second, because I think a lot of you watching already know this feeling. Not just being lied to, but finding out how many people around you have already quietly rearranged their whole picture of your life because of it. If stories like this one are why you keep coming back to this channel, I'd really love it if you'd subscribe. It means a lot to know these are the kinds of stories you want me to keep telling. Once he believed I was really stepping back, Kevin got bolder fast. He told a big potential investor he owned the majority of the company. He doesn't. He never has. I found that out because Foster, trying hard to make things right by then, forwarded me his notes from that meeting without even realizing what he was actually handing me. Kevin also renegotiated a contract entirely on his own, without telling me, worth close to $200,000, signed under his name alone, as if the company already belonged to him and him only. Watching all of this happen in real time, quietly, from the sidelines, was its own kind of strange grief. I'd spent weeks mapping how far his story had spread. Now I was watching him spend the confidence that story had bought him, one decision at a time, on things that were never his to decide. Around this same time, I sat down with Foster and told him the truth, that I'd suspected him, pulled away from him for weeks, and that I was sorry, especially once I understood he'd only ever believed what everyone around him had already accepted as fact. He was quiet a minute. Then he said, "Let me know what you need." That meant more to me than I expected it to, and it reminded me that whatever else was happening, I still had people in that building I could trust completely. Every year, we hold a big year-end meeting with the staff, the board, and several major clients to plan for the year ahead. This year, Kevin was running the agenda, the way he'd apparently been telling people he would for months. He had no idea that by the time that meeting happened, I understood exactly how many rooms his story had already been living in, and exactly how much he'd already started building on top of it. I didn't warn him anything was coming. I spent the days before that meeting quietly finishing my own picture of everything, every client, every relative, every decision he'd made believing the company was already his. I just showed up that morning and took a seat near the back of the room, instead of my usual spot up front. Kevin opened the meeting the way he'd clearly gotten used to doing it lately, confident, relaxed, talking about his plans for next year. At one point, he said, right out loud in front of everyone, "Now that it's really mine to run." Priscilla was sitting near the front. She raised her hand, polite but direct. "Kevin, when your mom and I talked last spring, she never once mentioned stepping back. Did I miss something, or did you?" The room went quiet. Kevin laughed it off at first, said something about getting ahead of the paperwork. But Foster spoke up next, calm, not angry, just honest. "Kevin, I helped you go through that old filing cabinet last year. I didn't help you rewrite what was in it." Then, one of our longtime employees mentioned the $200,000 contract and asked, plainly, whose name was actually supposed to be on it. Kevin looked around the room, and for the first time in months, nobody was nodding along with him. That's when I stood up from the back. Everyone turned around. I hadn't planned exact words, but they came out simple. "I never retired," I said. I never said one word to anyone about stepping back. My son found some old notes I wrote for myself years ago, and he's been quietly handing them out as fact to everyone in this room, and to people well outside it, for months. That's not a misunderstanding. It's time everyone here heard the truth directly from me. I let that sit in the room for a second. Then I did the thing I actually came there to do. I didn't do it to hurt him. I did it because I'm still the person whose name is on the door, and a company doesn't run on hurt feelings. It runs on somebody making the hard call. Effective today, I said, I'm resuming full decision-making authority at Calder Precision Tools. Every contract signed in the last year without my sign-off, including the one just mentioned, is being reviewed starting this week. I'll be reaching out personally to every client who was told I'd stepped back, so they hear the truth from me directly instead of secondhand. And until further notice, Kevin will not be representing this company to clients, investors, or partners on his own. Nobody clapped this time. Nobody needed to. Kevin didn't argue with a single word of it. He just sat there, and for the first time since that toast, he looked like he understood exactly how much room he'd been standing in that was never actually his. I want to be honest about the weeks that followed, because they weren't dramatic. They were just slow and a little sad. I called Priscilla myself and told her plainly that I hadn't retired, that I was still running things, and that I was sorry she'd been given wrong information for so long. She was gracious about it, more than I probably deserved to expect, and she stayed a client. I made 2 more calls like that myself. Neither one was comfortable. Both needed to happen, and I wasn't going to hand that job to anyone else, least of all Kevin. The $200,000 contract got reworked properly, with my signature on it this time, and with terms our lawyer actually reviewed instead of whatever Kevin had agreed to on his own. For about 2 months, Kevin came to work every day and did real work, but he didn't run any client calls, didn't sit in on board discussions, didn't get to introduce himself as anything other than exactly what his actual job was. That was hard for him. I could see it. I let it be hard, because I think some things are supposed to be. He didn't ask me once during those 2 months when he'd get his old responsibilities back. I think he understood, without either of us saying it out loud, that asking wasn't going to be what fixed this. What fixed it slowly was showing up every day and doing the smaller job right, without complaining, without cutting corners, without ever once trying to talk his way back into a room before he'd actually earned the trust to be there. About 3 months after that meeting, I started including him again, a little at a time. A client call here, a sign-off on a small decision there, nothing all at once. I watched him handle every bit of it carefully, like a man who finally understood what it had cost to lose it. We sat down together not long after that, just the two of us, and I told him I could see the difference in how he was carrying himself. He said he thought about that meeting almost every day, and that the worst part wasn't losing the authority. It was realizing how many people had trusted him with something that was never really his to give away in the first place. I still believe Kevin can run this company someday. I've believed that since he was a kid, following me around the shop floor on Saturday mornings. But I understand something now I don't think I understood as clearly before all of this happened. Loving someone and trusting them with something you spent 41 years building are not actually the same thing. One of those you can give away freely. The other one, they have to earn, the same slow way I did. One honest decision at a time, whether anyone's watching or not. If this story meant something to you, I'd really appreciate it if you'd subscribe. It helps me know these are the stories worth telling more of. The quiet ones, about trust, and about how easily the people around us can start living inside a future we never actually agreed to. There's more of these coming. Before you go, I want to ask you something. If someone you loved tried to take something from you before it was ever truly theirs, would you have made them earn it back the way I did? Or would forgiving them right away have felt like the better kind of love?